1.1 What makes a robot human?
What are the traits of a robot? Robots are tireless, reliable, unemotional and unquestioning. That is, after all, how they are programmed. We invented robots and computers to be our faithful servants, to do the things that we couldn't or didn't want to do ourselves. In so many areas, robots perform better than humans, and we accept this with good grace because they are only robots and we are the superior ones. The one thing they can't do is be human. They can't feel, emote, create, or love. However, our notion of what it is to be a human versus a robot is currently being challenged by the latest experiments in computer programming. Take, for instance, the area of creativity. A little while ago, a new and exciting composer called Emily Howell broke onto the music scene. Her music was original, beautiful, and contemporary, and 2 albums were released. Emily's only flaw? She was someone's computer. The human responsible for Emily, American professor David Cope, has worked on robot creativity for many years. He had originally attempted to code a computer program which wrote music. The results were predictably terrible. So he gave up writing rules for the computer and instead just fed raw data into it for the computer to analyse itself. Cope eventually produced a computer that could analyse any composer in history and then write an entirely new work that sounded just like how that composer would have written it himself. He called it EMI, Experiments in Musical Intelligence. Composers were outraged, and musicians refused to perform EMI's works. Undaunted, Cope tried a less controversial approach. He formed a new database of only the new work that EMI had created. This he fed into his new computer program, Emily Howell, and from that point she began working on her own musical style. What is interesting is that her music is contemporary. Like other modern composers, she has learnt from the past to create music for our time. Emily is unfortunately even more controversial as she is now competing with humans in their own creative field. It is not only in the world of music that computers are making creative waves. Similarly, the art world is coming to terms with a program called The Painting Fool, a laptop software program which has learnt how different artistic styles and colours can represent moods and emotions. Again, the program absorbed many years of art history and, like Emily Howell, came up with its own contemporary style. The computer first reads the newspaper in order to set its mood for the day. Then it chooses an adjective to reflect that mood and does a portrait of a real person with that adjective in mind. After that, it looks at its own work to see if it has achieved the objectives it set out for itself. And if it thinks the work isn't good enough, it tries again. And sometimes, if it's in a very bad mood, it won't paint at all. Because the program operates in different moods and has the ability to analyse its own abilities as a human might, co-creator Simon Colton wants it to be recognised as an artist in its own right. Computer creativity is not just confined to the arts, however. British scientists have collaborated on a big project to come up with a laboratory machine that can think for itself. Adam is the world's first robot scientist. Adam acts in the same way as a human scientist. He comes up with a hypothesis, he devises experiments to test this hypothesis, conducts his experiments, analyses the findings, and then retests accordingly, all without the need for human intervention. Although not yet a Nobel Prize winner, Adam has already produced some original research into genetics. The same scientists are now developing another robot called Eve, and she will be twice as clever. So are these robots becoming like us? Part of our fascination with robots is that it makes us actually question what it means to be human, and ultimately we are their creators. If the whole experiment gets out of hand, we can just pull the plug on these machines, can't we? Unless, as in scary science fiction movies, our robots decide that they no longer need us.
2.1 An acceptance speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am absolutely delighted to accept this prestigious award. To be honest, I completely forgot to plan an acceptance speech as I wasn't entirely convinced that I had any chance of winning. It's been a long road, and looking back, I can see it was wildly optimistic of me to think that my first novel would be quick and easy to write. 5 years later, I can safely say that it took a lot longer than I expected. However, I was perfectly happy spending day after day alone in my study writing, and I strongly recommend that everyone has a go at writing their own novel. I now fully intend to write a sequel, but hopefully a bit more quickly. I firmly believe that creative work is its own reward, but I must say that I greatly appreciate being given an award as well. Thank you.
(2.2) Adverbs with two forms.
It's nearly midnight. Why are you working so late again?
Oh no, is that the time? I'm not finding it easy to finish this article. And the deadline for the paper is midnight.
It's always the same. Work's taken over your life. You've hardly spent any time with me or the children lately.
You're right. I'm really sorry. But you know our paper is under pressure at the moment. I'm grateful not to have been made redundant like so many others.
I know, but it means you have to work twice as hard these days. Surely your newspaper bosses can see that it isn't good for any of its employees.
The paper quite rightly thinks that it will be much worse for its employees if more of us are out of work.
Is it as bad as that? But Mike, you're such a good writer. I think you'll easily find another job.
Well, I'm not so sure about that.
2.3 Writers on Writing. 1. Beryl Bainbridge, 1932 to 2010. English novelist from Liverpool.
When I write a novel, I'm writing about my own life. I'm writing a biography almost always. And to make it look like a novel, I either have a murder or a death at the end.
2. Ian Rankin, born 1960. Scottish crime writer.
It wasn't the thing my parents wanted me to be good at, but if you're working class and your parents have never owned their own house and never owned a car and stuff, they think you go to university to get a trade, to get a profession. So, accountant, lawyer, dentist, doctor. There was one relative, an aunt of mine, who had grown up with my mum in Bradford. She was married to an accountant, and he had a nice flash car. They owned their own home, seemed to have a very good standard of living, so I thought, well, I'll become an accountant. So by the age of sort of 15 or 16, that's what I thought I was going to do. And I was doing economics and accounts. And then there was this sort of epiphany. I was 17, I just sat my hires and I'd scraped a C for economics, just passed economics. And I thought, why the hell am I going to university to do a subject I'm really not that interested in and obviously not that good at? The thing I really like is English. I like books. I knew very few professional writers who made a living out of their writing, so there at university I was thinking, I'm going to have to become a teacher or hopefully an English lecturer, and I will continue to write as a hobby part-time. In the margins of my life, I'll be a writer.
3. Penelope Lively, born 1933. Novelist and writer of children's fiction.
When I was about 11 or 12, I think I must have said something about how I wanted to be a writer. I don't remember having any such aspiration until much, much later. But I must have said something, because Lucy, my governess, wrote to Somerset Maugham and said that she was governess to a little girl who wanted to be a writer, and what would Mr. Maugham suggest? Heaven knows how she managed to write to him. I suppose care of the publishers. He wrote a very nice letter back saying absolutely the right thing. If your little girl is interested in writing, then the best thing she can do is read a lot. Perfect answer. Exactly what I'd say myself.
4. Michael Morpurgo, born 1943. Award-winning author of children's books.
One of the things that frightened me about writing when I was a small boy is that I had no ideas and no imagination. I was constantly being told this anyway, and I couldn't write very well. I could joke around like other boys, but on paper I had nothing really serious to add. No adventures I wanted to write down, because I just didn't link the two up. I think I learnt at some point that the imagination is not something that you either have or don't have. For me, and we're all different, it's triggered by real people, historical events, memories, by reality of some sort. I don't think in my life I've ever written a story which does not have some little root, some little seed of truth or observation.
5. Wendy Cope, born 1945. Contemporary English poet.
You've got to have something to say, but you don't always know what it is. It's often just some words in your head that you think could be a line of a poem, so you write them down and see where it goes. One of the major misconceptions about poetry is that the poet has some kind of agenda and intentions, not just that some words come into their head and then they start playing with them and seeing where they go. Because sometimes I will try to write a poem and it just comes out dead because there isn't really anything that's deeply felt or worth saying. One thing that makes poems work is strong emotion, and I remember hearing James Berry, I think it was, saying that one characteristic of a good poet is that they feel things intensely, and he said, "Of course, poets are not the only people who feel things intensely, but it is one of the qualities, and I think that's true."
6. P.D. James, 1920 to 2014. English writer of detective novels.
By the time I begin writing, the plot is there, and there's a chart which shows in which order the things come, so that the structure is right. But that will change as new ideas occur during the writing, which makes the writing very exciting. New ideas, sometimes one greets them with huge enthusiasm and thinks, "Oh, that's really clever. Yes, this is how it happened, and this is logical and right, and that will be how it will be." So I never get exactly the book that I thought I was going to write.
7. Michael Holroyd, born 1935. Biographer.
The only happiness one gets from writing is doing a good day's work, of suddenly discovering something on the page which works. You pick up the page, you shake it, it's there. It doesn't come to bits, and you didn't know it at the beginning of the day, and now you know it. Now that's a real happiness, and unless there is some element of that, well, why on earth is one writing? Because otherwise, moving a pen across the page is not all that enjoyable.
4.1. Cold callers.
Ugh! That was another cold caller.
I might have guessed. You were being incredibly rude.
Well, what do you expect? I can't be bothered to be polite to them. They will keep ringing when I'm trying to work.
I must say that is one of the biggest problems of working from home. How on earth do they get our number?
You might well ask. But then a lot of them are crooks. That was someone pretending to be calling from Microsoft, saying there was a virus on my computer. and wanting me to give them access to it. I didn't, of course.
I should think so too.
Well, it's a scam I've heard about. They mess up your computer and charge a fortune to put it right. Mind you, there may well be a virus on my computer. How should I know? I had to laugh when she said, "Your computer's working very slowly, isn't it?" I did think, you can say that again.
Maybe we should register with that organisation that's supposed to stop cold calls.
We might as well. It's free and it can't do any harm. But I think it only reduces the number of calls you get.
Well, we'll see.
4.2 Dynamo, a modern-day magician.
When you hear the word magician, what springs to mind? Is it the variety show magician with magic wand in a traditional outfit of shiny waistcoat, bow tie and top hat? Or perhaps it's the glitz and glamour of a Vegas-style illusionist, complete with wide-lapelled sequin jacket, perm and full makeup that occurs to you first. Magic seemed to go through a phase of being, quite literally, old hat. It had a rather old-fashioned feel to it, no matter how clever the acts were. But now there's a new type of magician who is bringing magic back into the mainstream in Britain and giving it street cred into the bargain. Thanks to the street tricks of a young man called Dynamo, magic and illusion are once again super cool. Dynamo has been celebrated for the modernity of his act. He doesn't use a stage, a string of assistants, or any of the shiny accessories of traditional magic shows. Instead, he walks the streets in a bomber jacket, a baseball cap and trainers, accompanied by a handheld camera operator, sharing his magic with the astounded general public, and then strolling quietly away before they can get their heads around what has just happened. He doesn't have a speciality. He is as brilliant with cards and small hand tricks as he is with far bigger stunts of mystery and illusion. He can pull out the playing card you were thinking about, put mobile phones in bottles, and change names on credit cards just as easily as he strolls down buildings or levitates, or once memorably walked on water across the River Thames. When it comes to magic, it appears that he can do it all. Dynamo, aka Stephen Frayne, didn't have the easiest start in life. He was born in industrial Bradford, northern England, in a run-down part of the city to a teenage mum. His father was in and out of prison, and he was partly brought up by his great-grandfather, who was an enthusiastic amateur magician. Born with a digestive disorder, Crohn's disease, which left him severely debilitated, the young Stephen failed to put on any weight, and as a small, pale and sickly child, he was an easy target for school bullies. His great-grandfather showed him how to use magic tricks to his advantage, and as he got a name for himself, the bullying ceased. However, he was always regarded as odd and an outsider, so school life wasn't a success, and he left for London while still in his teens. After having been granted a small business loan, Dynamo bought himself a DVD recorder and laptop and started filming some of the trick sequences that would make up his first DVD, Underground Magic. His current worldwide following gradually came about after some of his video clips appeared on YouTube. A couple of thousand passers-by in London watched him walk across the Thames in front of the Houses of Parliament on a Saturday afternoon before he was picked up by a police speedboat. A couple of years later, 1.6 billion viewers globally had watched the illusion on YouTube, which led to the offer of his own TV show, Magician Impossible, on a small TV channel. In the show, he performs tricks that leave his audience stunned, including a variety of celebrities. Performing tricks on famous people makes it clear that his targets are not in on the act, and celebrities appear keen to work with this impressive but quiet and unassuming character. He walked through a shop window in front of footballer Rio Ferdinand. He removed the sunglasses from the album cover photo of rapper Tiny Temper through the CD case. And even Prince Charles became a fan when Dynamo turned a pile of papers on his desk in the palace into real money. The famous Magic Circle was slower to show their appreciation of this newcomer on their scene. This organisation, for the best of all magicians, is shrouded in secrecy, even as to its location. As Dynamo said, They regarded me as a bit of an upstart. I wear a hoodie and trainers rather than a top hat and tails. I incorporate hip-hop into my act. I've always tried to go against the clichés of whatever magic is or was. However, they eventually opened their doors to him, wherever those doors are. But although he may have finally been accepted into mainstream magic, he hasn't lost any of his creative drive. It's not enough for me to amaze people once or twice, he says. I need to keep doing it. That means doing more and more amazing stuff.
5.1 Welcome to Florence.
Hi, you must be our new English flatmate, Ella.
Hello. Yes, I am. And you are?
Eamon. Welcome to Florence.
Eamon. That's an Irish name.
It is indeed. I'm from Ballyliffin in County Donegal.
Ah, I know that village.
Really? Not many people do.
My dad and my brother played golf there just a couple of years ago.
They didn't, did they? That's amazing.
Yeah. So, what about Florence? Have you been living here long?
I have. I came for a year and I'm still here 3 years later.
You must like it then.
I do. I can't imagine who wouldn't. And you arrived yesterday.
Well, I did, but my suitcases didn't. They haven't arrived yet.
Oh, no. Are you going to contact the airline?
I already have. At first they said they'd be delivered today, but they just called to say they won't be until tomorrow morning.
Oh, that's too bad. If I can help in any way, I will. Just ask.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind. Are you studying here at the university?
I was. I studied Italian for a year, but now I'm teaching English.
You mean Irish?
Come on, my accent isn't that strong.
I can't speak much Italian. I wish I could. I'm here to work for an English company, but I'm hoping to pick up the language if I can.
I'm sure you will in no time. And I could give you lessons if you like.
Would you? That'd be fantastic.
No problem. I'd really like to. And I'll introduce you to the other 2 flatmates. They're from the US and Australia. We're quite a mixed bunch.
5.2 A British diplomat tells a joke in Japan.
A British diplomat was working in Japan, and sometimes he had to give lectures as part of his job. He had given this lecture many times, and he always began it with a joke, but the audience never laughed. He didn't speak any Japanese. You don't have to speak a foreign language to be a British diplomat. So he thought that the lack of laughter was because his translator didn't translate the joke very well. He decided that he ought to get a new translator. He found an excellent one who was bilingual in Japanese and English, and he told him that he'd pay him a large fee as long as he translated the opening joke really well. The diplomat gave his lecture, and to his delight, everyone in the audience laughed loudly at the joke. He congratulated his new translator profusely on doing such a good job and paid him well. Little did he know that this is what the translator actually said in Japanese. OK, the diplomat is beginning his lecture. As usual with lectures by British speakers, he's beginning with a joke. I don't know why. The jokes are always really stupid and usually say something ridiculous about Japanese people. Fortunately, you don't have to listen to this joke because I'm not going to translate it. But you mustn't look bored, so start smiling now, and to be polite, you must laugh when he's finished. So, get ready to laugh when I tell you. 1, 2, 3, laugh now!
5.3 Incompatible Travellers. The best traveller and the worst.
The last few months had brought to my attention an important incompatibility between us, one that I'd never noticed before. For a pair of lifelong travelers, Philippe and I actually travel very differently. The reality about Philippe is that he's both the best traveler I've ever met and by far the worst. He hates strange bathrooms and dirty restaurants and uncomfortable trains and foreign beds. Given a choice, He will always select a lifestyle of routine, familiarity, and reassuringly boring everyday practices, all of which might make you assume that the man is not fit to be a traveler at all. But you would be wrong to assume that, for here is Philippe's traveling gift, his superpower, the secret weapon that renders him peerless. He can create a familiar habitat of reassuringly boring everyday practices for himself any place if you just let him stay in one spot. He can assimilate absolutely anywhere on the planet in the space of about 3 days, and then he's capable of staying put in that place for the next decade or so without complaint. This is why Philippe has been able to live all over the world, not merely travel, but live. Over the years, he has folded himself into societies from South America to Europe, from the Middle East to the South Pacific. He arrives somewhere utterly new, decides he likes the place, moves right in, learns the language, and instantly becomes a local.
I'm not like that, though.
Whereas Philippe can find a corner anywhere in the world and settle down for good, I can't. I'm much more restless than he is. My restlessness makes me a far better day-to-day traveler than he will ever be. I am infinitely curious and almost infinitely patient with mishaps and minor disasters, so I can go anywhere on the planet. That's not a problem. The problem is I just can't live anywhere on the planet. I'd realized this only a few weeks earlier, back in northern Laos, when Philippe had woken up one lovely morning in Luang Prabang and said, "Darling, let's stay here." "Sure," I'd said. "We can stay here for a few more days if you want." "No, I mean, let's move here. Let's forget about me immigrating to America. It's too much trouble. This is a wonderful town. I like the feeling of it. It reminds me of Brazil 30 years ago. It wouldn't take much money or effort for us to run a little hotel or shop here, rent an apartment, settle in." In reaction, I had only blanched. He was serious. He would just do that. He would just up and move to northern Laos indefinitely and build a new life there. But I can't.
Travel that wasn't even travel.
What Philippe was proposing was travel at a level I could not reach. Travel that wasn't even travel anymore, but rather a willingness to be ingested indefinitely by an unfamiliar place. I wasn't up for it. My traveling, as I understood then for the first time, was far more dilettantish than I had ever realized. As much as I love snacking on the world, when it comes time to settle down, to really settle down, I wanted to live at home, in my own country, in my own language, near my own family, and in the company of people who think and believe the same things that I think and believe. This basically limits me to a small region of planet Earth consisting of southern New York State, the more rural sections of central New Jersey, northwestern Connecticut, and bits of eastern Pennsylvania. Quite a scanty habitat for a bird who claims to be migratory. Philippe, on the other hand, my flying fish, has no such domestic limitations. A small bucket of water anywhere in the world will do him just fine.
6.1. Adding emphasis in conversations. 1.
Ben's very happy with his move to Edinburgh.
That's good. It's Barclays Bank he works for, isn't it?
Well, he used to, but not anymore. The Bank of Scotland is where he works now.
What I'd like to know is why he left Barclays. He earned good money there.
Yeah, the pay he did like, but the job was too stressful.
2.
London's heaving with tourists at the moment.
I know. I think it's the historic buildings they come to see.
Yeah, there's that. But what's also very popular is the theatre. Most shows are full.
You're right. The theatre really does boost London's economy.
But something a lot of tourists don't realise is that the rest of the country isn't like London.
Yes, they don't often explore further afield. Personally, in summer, the thing I like to do is get out of the city.
6.2 Land Girls.
Back to the land we must all lend a hand, to the farms and the fields we must go. There's a job to be done, though we can't fire a gun, we can still do our bit with the hoe.
In 1939, when the Second World War was looming, the British government recognised that the country should grow its own food to avoid being reliant on imports. However, there was a shortage of agricultural workers in the countryside. For decades, young men had been leaving for more profitable work in factories. Then, with many men leaving to join the armed forces, there was a desperate need for labour. Therefore, on the 1st of June 1939, the Women's Land Army was set up by the government. The WLA was expected to replace men in the fields, forests and livestock sheds for the duration of the war. Unfortunately, the farming community treated the whole idea with suspicion and scorn. Working in the countryside was considered no place for a decent young woman. Furthermore, city girls would simply not be up to the job. Nonetheless, glamorous posters were issued advertising a wonderfully healthy way of life in the country, and the recruitment process got underway. Thousands of girls were interviewed to see if they were suitable, but in reality, it wasn't hard to get into the WLA. The minimum age was 17, but many young women lied about their age, desperate to escape city poverty. All land girls were given a cursory medical before being issued with work clothes for the fields. They were also given a heavy, uncomfortable brown uniform that they were to wear while off duty. They were to earn just 26 shillings a week, far less than their male counterparts. Starting work in the country was a shock for the new recruits from the city, many of whom had never seen a field or a cow. Not only were there new skills to acquire with only rudimentary training, but the work was also very physical. Their tasks were endless. They learned to operate heavy farm machinery. They planted and harvested wheat and vegetables, cleared fields, picked fruit, milked and herded cows, felled trees, and caught rats. The day often started at 4 a.m., and the hours were long. Land girls were expected to work a 48-hour week in winter and 50 hours in the summer, but most worked much longer than this, especially at harvest time. The girls' circumstances differed depending on where they were sent and what the conditions were like. Some stayed on individual farms and could be quite lonely. Others stayed in large hostels in vacant country houses or schools and travelled to different farms on bikes. But they were initially regarded with indifference or even hostility by the farming community. Some girls even complained that the Italian prisoners of war who were working the land were treated better than them and given more food. However, many came to love their new way of life in the country, with its relative freedom, and made lifelong friends. By the end of the war, the 100,000 WLA volunteers had carried out their duties with such dedication, skill and enthusiasm that the farmers were the first to complain when the organisation was eventually disbanded in 1950. The role of women in the countryside and everywhere else was changed forever.
6.3 Compound nouns formed with prepositions.
Fallout. Fallback. Overall. Spin-off. Breakthrough. Breakout. Breakup. Outcome.
Downpour. Setback. Set up. Upshot. Pile up. Underground. Outpatient. Outcome. Hangout. Hangover. Hang up. Offspring.
6.4. Adding emphasis with stress.
That was a fantastic film, wasn't it?
You're kidding. I thought it was awful.
But the special effects were amazing.
It was all special effects and no story.
I suppose the plot was a bit confusing.
You're telling me.
It wasn't that bad.
It was. I didn't understand a word.
I loved the car chases.
I didn't know who was chasing who or why.
Who or why doesn't matter. It's the spectacle that counts.
Not to me. What I need is a recognisable plot.
It was exciting.
If you call noise and violence exciting...
Well, I'm going to recommend it to James.
I wouldn't recommend it to anyone.
It's his kind of film.
Well, you know him better than I do.
OK, next time you choose the movie.
If there is a next time.
6.5. Shifting stress patterns. 1.
What kind of films do you like?
I like historical films.
2.
Why do you watch this rubbish?
I like historical films.
3.
You like historical novels, don't you?
I like historical films.
4.
What nationality is she?
I thought she was German.
5.
Tom said she was Swiss.
I thought she was German.
6.
Frank said she was German.
I thought she was German.
7.
I've just been working in Rome.
I'm going to work in Rome.
8.
I hear you're going to work in Milan.
I'm going to work in Rome.
9.
So, you've been working in Rome.
I'm going to work in Rome.
10.
Sue believed his every word.
I could tell he was lying.
11.
What do you think of what they said?
I could tell he was lying.
12.
What did you think of what he said?
I could tell he was lying.
7.1. Forming the correct tense.
What if I said I wasn't coming to your brother's photography exhibition tonight?
Then I'd tell you that you most definitely are.
I so wish we didn't have to go.
Well, we're going. I promised we would.
If only you hadn't. And I wish you'd never bought him that fancy camera now. I mean, his photos are always so miserable. And black and white, of course. It's as if he didn't know it was possible for photos to be in colour.
It's called social realism. Would you rather he just took photos of people grinning happily at the camera?
Yes, I'd prefer it if he did, actually. I mean, the odd smile wouldn't do any harm. And I wouldn't mind looking at endless photos of people in grim urban situations if it actually did anyone any good. I can't see that it does. It's just voyeurism.
Oh, for goodness sake, I wish you'd lighten up.
Well, I wish your brother would. And what I don't get is, he acts as if he's some kind of deep-thinking socialist. No one would guess he lives in a swanky £1 million apartment full of boys' toys.
Oh, give it a rest, will you? And come on, it's time we got ready to go.
OK. Oh, well, the good thing is I won't have to look as though I'm enjoying myself. I can just scowl meaningfully at the horror of modern society.
7.2. Synonyms. Happy and sad. 1.
Mum is obviously missing Jack now that he's left home. She even gets wistful when she talks about the mess he used to make around the house.
2.
Naomi was elated for days after the doctor told her she was finally pregnant.
3.
Of course Jerry is bitter about not being given the manager's job. He knows he deserved it, and that Bob only got it because he's friends with the old manager.
4.
I've told Cheryl not to give up hope of getting acting work in London, but she's become very despondent about it. She's actually stopped going to auditions for parts.
5.
It's nice to hear Alice back to her usual chirpy self. It was very quiet around the house while she was recovering from the operation.
6.
I guess I should be ashamed of it, but I felt gleeful when I heard that my ex-husband had broken up with his new partner.
7.
We've been feeling very out of sorts since we got back from all our travelling. I think we're suffering from reverse culture shock.
8.
The strikers said all of the team were feeling very upbeat about their prospects for next season and that the new manager had done wonders for their team spirit.
9.
It's understandable that you've been in the doldrums since you lost your job, but watching TV all day isn't going to help. It's not going to change until you start being more proactive about finding something else.
10.
I didn't mind not being project manager. I'm not really that ambitious, so I'm content just being a part of the team.
7.3. A joke.
2 hunters are out in the woods when one of them collapses. He doesn't seem to be breathing, and his eyes are glazed. The other man whips out his phone and calls the emergency services. "I think my friend's dead," he gasps. "What can I do?" The operator says, "Calm down. I can help. First, let's make sure he's dead." "Okay," says the man, putting his phone down. There is a silence, then a shot is heard. Back on the phone, the man says, "Okay, now what?"
8.1. Meet the first female footballers.
Knickerbocker glory. They kicked up quite a fuss in their bloomers and knickerbockers. In buttoned-up blouses and billowing bloomers, they may not look as though they are dressed for the football pitch, but these are the members of Britain's first official female football teams, whose clashes on the field in the 1880s sparked riots off it and contributed to greater empowerment for women. The pictures, uncovered as part of an exhibition charting the history of women's football, reveal the characters who tackled a man's world for the first time. However, while thousands flocked to see their matches, by 1895, when these photographs were taken, they were still less fascinated by the players' silky skills than by what they might be wearing for the unladylike spectacle. One newspaper report at the time said, "The young women presented a pretty appearance on the field, and this was in great measure due to the nice assortment of colours, as well as the dainty way in which the women set them off." Casting aside corsets in favour of voluminous knickerbockers and prim bonnets amounted to quite an eyeful back in Victorian times, and spectators frequently tried to get onto the pitch to get closer to the players. Another newspaper of the day noted, "There will always be curiosity to see women do unwomanly things, and it is not surprising that the match was attended by a crowd numbering several thousands, very few of whom would like to have their own sisters or daughters exhibiting themselves on the football field." At the centre of the furore was the British Ladies Football Club, which played dozens of games that year. Founded by the enigmatic Nellie Hudson, known as Nettie J. Honeyball, the club fielded teams called North and South, which played against each other. In a newspaper interview, she declared she had founded the club with the fixed resolve of proving to the world that women are not the ornamental and useless creatures men have pictured. Sports writers of the day tended to disagree, though. According to a match report from the sketch, it would be idle to attempt any description of the play. It went on. The first few minutes were sufficient to show that football by women is totally out of the question. For the most part, the ladies wandered aimlessly over the field at an ungraceful jog-trot. A smaller ball than usual was utilised, but the strongest among them could propel it no further than a few yards. In the North team was Helen Matthews, a goalkeeper who played under the name of Mrs. Graham. She had founded the first female Scottish national side, Mrs. Graham's 11, in 1881. In May of that year, riots erupted after the team defeated an English side twice. As a result, women were banned from playing football in Scotland, so Matthews headed south and later joined forces with Nellie Hudson. But many believe her team deserves credit for helping women get the vote in Scottish local government elections, since campaigners received the royal assent just a day after the unrest. Stuart Gibbs, 47, who helped compile the exhibition, said, "The players were all part of the Rights for Women movement, so maybe the game was seen as a sign of the times and had some influence." Historian and exhibition organiser Colin Yates, 54, added, "The games often caused anger from men who disliked women doing what, at the time, was a man's job."
9.1 Attitude markers. 1.
Will you be going to the Rolling Stones concert?
Given that tickets are over £100, I don't think so.
2.
We'll need some cash. It's a private beach.
Surely they can't charge us for sitting on the sand.
3.
Do you like my shirt?
To be honest, I don't think that colour suits you.
4.
I knew you'd never get far in a singing contest.
At least I tried, though, unlike you.
5.
How did your match against the champions go?
Predictably, we lost. 6-0, in fact.
6.
Honestly, it was the worst meal I've ever had.
No doubt you won't be going back there again.
7.
Surely their new album isn't all bad.
Admittedly, there are a couple of decent songs.
8.
I assume Jo passed her exams as expected.
Surprisingly, she didn't. She failed her maths.
9.2 Rhyming words. A. There.
Rare. Air. Billionaire. Prayer. Swear.
B. Zoo.
View. Cue. Blue. Debut. Through.
C. We.
Plea. Flee. Key. Key. Debris.
D. O.
Dough. Flow. So. Plateau. Foe.
9.3 Cockney rhyming slang. 1.
Come on, kids! Up them apples and into bed!
2.
Can you lend me some bread?
3.
Don't worry, love. I won't say a dicky bird to anyone.
4.
Oh, I need to sit down. I've been on my plates all day.
5.
Watch your bag. This square's a favourite spot for tea leaves.
6.
Well, time to go home and see how the trouble and strife is.
7.
Here, come and have a butcher's at my new car.
8.
So how are you, me old China?
9.
I think you've been telling a few porkies.
10.
Someone will half-inch your bike if you leave it there.
11.
Do you know how to send photos on this phone? I haven't a Scooby.
12.
Come on, it's not difficult. Use your loaf.
9.4. Mick Jagger, Grand Master of Rock.
In the early days of rock music, people would have laughed at the idea of a rock singer in his 70s. But that hasn't stopped Mick Jagger pursuing his career of rock legend for over half a century. He's been described as one of the most popular and influential frontmen in the history of rock and roll. He was born Michael Philip Jagger in 1943 to a middle-class family in Kent, England. His father a teacher and his mother a hairdresser. Although bright and studious, at one time the young Jagger also aimed to follow the teaching profession, he had an overriding passion.
I always sang as a child. I was one of those kids who just liked to sing.
He sang in the church choir and copied all the singers he heard on the radio and TV. In primary school, Jagger had already come across the boy who would later be a fellow member of one of the greatest rock groups in history. He and Keith Richards were classmates until they went to different secondary schools. At his new school, Mick was lead singer in the blues band he formed with friends. The band worried whether he'd be able to continue singing after an accident playing basketball, when Mick bit off and swallowed the tip of his tongue. It turned out the injury had indeed changed his voice, but for the better, they thought, less polished and middle class. Mick now sounded grittier, tougher, more authentically street, said one band member. Biting off the tip of his tongue might have been the best thing that ever happened to Mick Jagger. After a chance meeting with Keith Richards again at 17, they developed a friendship based on their shared love of American blues music. Jagger entered the London School of Economics, with thoughts of becoming a journalist or politician. But his energies soon became focused on the new band he joined, along with Keith, which in 1962 became known as the Rollin' Stones. The G was added later. Their unique sound quickly attracted attention, and their gigs soon became a popular part of the swinging 60s London scene. Jagger's parents were not enthusiastic. His strict father had never approved of the kind of music his son played, calling it jungle music. That's a very good description, Mick once replied. Mick decided to leave college nevertheless and devote himself to being a full-time rock and roller. After initially performing cover versions of their favourite blues numbers, Jagger and Richards went on to become one of the most creative and prolific songwriting teams ever. Jagger's high-energy, wild performances and distinctive growling vocal delivery became a trademark of the group, along with Richards' guitar playing. They were seen as anti-establishment, whereas the members of the other major British group at the time, the Beatles, were seen as cute and charming.
I wasn't trying to be rebellious in those days, Jagger says. I was just being me, ordinary, the guy from suburbia who sings in this band.
His subsequent life has been anything but ordinary, however. He married twice, in 1971 and 1978, and is a devoted father to the 7 children he has had by 4 women. He set up the band's own record label, has acted in films, won awards, produced films, met presidents, and at 60 collected a knighthood from Prince Charles. He has also amassed a considerable fortune, selling over 200 million albums. Nonetheless, his constant first love remains performing. Despite being a great-grandfather,
He still sings with the same raw energy and physicality he had decades earlier, and loves touring. Each show is a new event. It's a very exciting couple of hours, and it's a very intense relationship with the audience. It is this undiminished passion for what he does that has made him a legend in his own lifetime.
10.1 Charles Euxter, the veteran bodybuilder.
I was a very sickly child. From the age of 6, I had constant headaches and chronic tonsillitis. I became pale, sluggish, and my growth was slow. I remember noticing one day that my best friend, who was a year younger than me, was slightly taller, and that I was very upset about it. At 13, I had my tonsils removed, and, as my health improved, everything changed. I shot up, and suddenly I was full of energy. I thought back to myself as a frail, sickly boy, and vowed never to be like that again. I took up boxing, rowing, and rugby. Staying fit and strong became my priority. After school, I trained to be a dentist, but sport remained an important hobby. I only once let myself go. As I crept into my 40s, I adopted my wife's sedentary lifestyle. We spent a lot of time doing nothing. Inevitably, my blood pressure plummeted, and one day I felt a sharp pain in my legs, only to discover the dark earthworm-like patterns of varicose veins across my calves. It was my first brush with old age, and I didn't like it. Immediately I resumed rowing to stay fit. Life went on. At 60, I discovered veterans rowing and started competing internationally, eventually winning 36 gold medals. I'm not a particularly talented sportsman, but I've always been a great trier. At 75, many of my friends began to pass away. People were getting older around me, but I was only just ready to retire. Then, at 85, I had a crisis. I looked at myself in the mirror one day and saw an old man. I was overweight, my posture was terrible, and there was skin hanging off me where muscle used to be. I looked like a wreck. I started to consider the fact that I was probably going to die soon. I knew I was supposed to slow down, but I'm vain. I missed my old body and wanted to be able to strut across the beach, turning heads. So, in my late 80s, I joined a bodybuilding club. There's no research into bodybuilding for the over 80s, so it's been an experiment. With weightlifting and protein shakes, my body began to change. It became broader, more V-shaped, and my shoulders and biceps became more defined. People began to comment on how much younger I looked, and my new muscular frame drew a lot of admiring glances from women. Everything I learned was tailored to help my body cope with old age. I took up judo to teach me how to fall properly. My circulation and posture improved, and I was told that there was a chance more muscle mass could protect my brain from Alzheimer's. I stopped thinking about dying. As I approached 90, my focus was on getting my body back. In 2008, I signed up for my first championship. I was nervous, but although I was the oldest contestant by about 20 years, everyone was very welcoming. I got higher scores than all the women taking part and a lot of the men. Then, at an event in Germany, I triumphed. scoring higher than any contestant in any age category for my 57 dips, 62 chin-ups, 50 push-ups, and 48 abdominal crunches, each in 45 seconds. As I'm over 70, they did make allowances. I could do the push-ups on my knees, for example, but I proved I wasn't past it. I'm not chasing youthfulness, I'm chasing health. To me, a 65-year-old is young. Yes, one day something will happen, and that will be it. But until that day comes, I'm going to carry on working on my abs.
10.2 Intonation in question tags. 1,
Lovely day, isn't it?
2,
I'm so sorry. I'm late, aren't I?
3,
You haven't seen my car keys anywhere, have you?
4,
You're angry with me, aren't you? I can tell.
5,
You couldn't give me a lift to the airport, could you?
6,
Drive carefully, dear, won't you?
7,
George Clooney didn't win the Oscar, did he?
8,
I think it's time to call it a day, isn't it?
9,
Helen's the twin wearing the pink dress, isn't she?
10,
You haven't got another parking ticket, have you?
10.3 Intonation in conversations. 1,
We had a holiday in Scotland. It rained a lot.
But you had a good time, didn't you?
Oh, yes. The countryside is stunning, isn't it?
It certainly is. The mountains just take your breath away.
They do, don't they?
2,
Whew, I'm exhausted. But it was a brilliant party, wasn't it?
It certainly was. The kids had a great time.
They did, didn't they?
They're all in Miss Bennett's class, you know.
Miss Bennett. She's a good teacher, isn't she?
I think so. The kids like her anyway.
3,
You haven't seen my red scarf, have you?
I saw Jane wearing a red scarf.
She hasn't borrowed it again, has she? She's always taking my stuff.
Surely she asks you first, doesn't she?
She does not. I hate my sister.
4,
I thought Oliver Odell was great in that play. He's a great actor, isn't he?
He is. But I've heard he's been having a lot of problems lately.
He's been having problems, has he? I had no idea.
Yes. His third wife walked out on him.
So, he was married 3 times, was he?
Yes. And he has a drink problem.
Oh, he does he? Poor guy.
Yes. Didn't you see his hand shaking?
Was it? You don't miss anything, do you?
11.1 Technology. What next? A. There's an aura that's only you.
How many passwords do you currently have for cards, gadgets and online accounts? How many times have you forgotten a password and had to come up with a new one? Electronic security is now a major headache as we attempt to keep our devices and personal details safe from increasingly sophisticated hackers. Cambridge computer expert Frank Stajano believes so. He and his team are researching an electronic aura, an electronic field around our bodies that would activate our and only our gadgets. To create it, we would insert microchips in our clothes, glasses, jewellery, and even under our skin. Outside our personal aura, our computer, tablet, smartphone, bank cards, car keys, etc. would simply cease to function. To someone else, they would just be useless junk. Stojano is also developing a tiny gadget which you hold, called a Pico, after the Italian philosopher Giovanni Pico, revered for his extraordinary memory. A Pico would be capable of remembering thousands of passwords and login names. With it, you could instantly interact with any number of devices and websites by holding it near. Again, outside your aura field, your Pico wouldn't operate. The problem with computer passwords is only going to get worse, said Stojano. With our Pico project, we are going for the long-term solution.
B. Meshing better together. Whatever did we do without our mobiles? Countless lives have been saved since the advent of mobile phones, due to the speed with which the emergency services can now be contacted. But unfortunately, this is not always the case. As various incidents worldwide, terrorist attacks, hurricanes, tsunamis have demonstrated, telecom services can be the first to collapse or be overloaded in a crisis. Professor Jonathan Zittrain of Harvard University thinks we have the capability to build a new type of system called a mesh network to solve this problem. Currently, if you want to get through to somebody, you connect to a data network via a nearby phone mast through your carrier, which then connects you to that person. But what if your phone could connect directly with another mobile phone without an intermediary? Like passing a bucket of water along a chain of people to put out a fire, we could pass information along our phones in the same way. This mesh network would allow phones to connect with each other if regular systems failed. Apps could be built into phones and networks which would allow people to connect in a crisis, help each other, and potentially save more lives. C. Getting under your skin.
We are already used to gadgets that track our health. Already commonplace are wearable devices to monitor our movement, heart rate and sleep patterns. So the potential next step in healthcare is to go one better than that. In the near future, people could be implanted with tiny electronic sensors beneath their skin and in their brains to collect detailed personal information about the state of their health. Researchers in the USA have already developed a hydrogel that can be applied under the skin like a tattoo. This gel monitors the nitric oxide in your body, low levels of which are an early indicator of heart or lung problems. Other sensors are already able to monitor transplants or activate prosthetic limbs. Although we are still some way off being able to monitor general health, researchers believe that with spiralling healthcare costs, this may be the only way forward. Constant data about our bodies could detect the onset of diseases so they may be caught and dealt with early, thereby saving costs. And it could revolutionise our attitude to health. We would become very aware of how diet and lifestyle choices affected our physical well-being.
D. Doing it yourself. Do you feel rather overwhelmed by technology these days? Are you struggling to keep up with technological advances? Over the last 20 years, many of us have become alienated by new technology, feeling frightened of it rather than enabled by it. 20 years ago, computers were still simple enough that people could learn to program them. It gave them a feeling of power over their devices. Now our gadgets are non-programmable, or so complicated that it takes at least a college degree to understand how they work. Eben Upton, though, wants us to return to a simpler time. His project, Raspberry Pi, has produced an inexpensive credit card-sized computer that he had hoped would encourage schools to teach children how to program. But in fact, not only children, but also adults have taken to the new computer with alacrity. Upton hopes this will herald a new era of self-programming, where people can see their ideas become reality through their own efforts, without selling out to large, faceless corporations. If more people were able to operate technology sufficiently to work for themselves, then we would eventually become a smaller, more personal society again. Upton believes that regaining control over our destinies would lead to a huge increase in our happiness and well-being. 11.2 Sounds and Spelling. A poem.
I have a spelling checker. I have a spelling checker. It came with my PC. It seeks to find for my review mistakes I cannot see. I strike a key and type a word and wait for it to say, whether I am wrong or right, it shows me straight away. As soon as a mistake is made, it knows before too long, and I can put the error right. It's in no way ever wrong. I have run this poem through it. I am sure you're pleased to know. It's letter perfect in its way. My checker told me so.
12.1 The Midlife Crisis.
Crisis? What crisis? Jackie Stone reports on that most difficult time of life. The syndrome has been common for decades. A man reaches his mid to late 40s and suddenly appears to have rediscovered the clothes he was wearing in his 20s, albeit in a larger size. The leather trousers are politely ignored by his friends, but there are sniggers when the bright red or yellow sports car, or worse, a motorbike, makes its appearance, and raised eyebrows when he starts turning up at parties with girlfriends young enough to be his daughter. And then the phrase is whispered among those watching, with a knowing nudge and a wink, midlife crisis. The term midlife crisis was first coined in the 1960s, when remaining a conventionally staid adult lost its attraction for some, and the temptation to join in with the radical experimentations of the youth of the time became too strong to resist. It was thought to occur mostly with men between the ages of 40 and 60, and no matter how much of a cliché the syndrome became, there has always seemed to be an abundant supply of individuals who follow its predictable pattern, apparently unable to see that they have become a figure of fun. According to recent studies, however, things have changed, and the midlife crisis itself has undergone a major transformation in recent years. For a start, a desperate attempt to hang on to a more youthful appearance clearly passes the equal opportunities test these days, with so many women going under the cosmetic surgeon's knife that the men's predilection for a bit of hair dye and moisturiser seems tame in comparison. And it all begins ever younger. One of the triggers for a major identity crisis appears to have been the accomplishment of long-held career goals, leading to an empty sense of, so what now? With younger people attaining senior management positions much sooner, the average age of CEOs has fallen from 59 to 48 in the last generation, these career plateaus can come much earlier in life. Even for those who aren't as ambitious, severe work pressure often leads to a need to re-evaluate career options in one's 30s, bringing on a crossroads moment well before the big 4-0 is reached. This applies to women too these days, and whether career-oriented or not, another factor for mothers is the bewildering freedom which hits them when the children have left home. While 45 is still the most common tipping point, the typical signs of a midlife crisis appear to have shifted to reflect more recent trends. Gone is the tendency to join a golf club or go night clubbing. Recent surveys suggest that men and women the wrong side of 40 are most likely to reveal their angst about bidding farewell to their younger selves by looking up old boyfriends or girlfriends on Facebook, considering a tattoo, running a half marathon, deciding it's time to go to music festivals again, taking a sabbatical, removing all details of age from their online presence, using younger photos of themselves as online avatars. Many of the people who responded to surveys on this topic complained about the term midlife crisis itself, however, and the disparaging way it is used. 2/3 of Britons thought it was an insulting stereotype, and men complained that while they are castigated for letting themselves go as they get older, any attempt to look after their appearance after the age of 40 was often met with ridicule and the accusation of a midlife crisis. Perhaps we need to remember that we get the word crisis from the Greek krisis, meaning turning point. It's not difficult to see, as the psychologist Carl Jung explained in some detail, that while our personalities may alter somewhat throughout life, there should come a time when the ego identity we've grown up with undergoes a radical overhaul in preparation for the second half of life. And it's not as if exploring new activities and deciding to get fitter is something to be criticised. As a spokesman for Jeep, one of the companies who carried out one of the surveys, said, "The traditional image of a midlife crisis is dead and buried. Nowadays, it's more about living for the moment and making the most of things and leading an active and healthy lifestyle."
12.2 Expressions with light, weather and food. 1.
I've done lots of revision, but I'm still worried about my final exam tomorrow.
Don't worry, it'll be a breeze.
2.
I wonder if you could take on some of my work while I'm on holiday.
No, sorry, I'm snowed under with work already.
3.
You must be worried about whether they'll renew your visa.
Yeah, it feels like a cloud hanging over me at the moment.
4.
Where did you get that amazing idea for this advertising campaign?
It just came to me in a flash.
5.
That wasn't an easy press conference for the Prime Minister, was it?
No, the journalists gave him a really good grilling.
6.
It's a shame you had so many problems on your flight back after such a nice holiday.
Yes, it meant that it all ended on a really sour note.
7.
Everyone's talking about climate change again after all these floods.
Yes, it's gone back to being a hot topic at the moment.
8.
I'm not sure I trust that new friend of Kevin's.
Me neither. He seems a shady character.
9.
That's an interesting article on parenting, isn't it?
Yes, it's certainly given me some food for thought.
10.
I can't believe Andrew married Rona a month after he met her.
Yes, it was a whirlwind romance.